Hello and a warm welcome to today's second A-Level history presentation. Your presenters of the A-Level sessions are myself, Ms Karen Thomas, and Mr Andrew Morell. Today's session will be delivered by Mr Morell, so over to you Mr Morell for today's presentation.
Thank you very much. So today is our second A-Level catch-up session, second of four. Last week we looked at Unit 3, how to manage thematic content and focusing on key concepts. If you missed that, that's no problem at all. If you Google the term in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you'll find the website and you'll be able to cycle through and find a recording and this presentation from last week as well. This week then we're going to look at essay writing, so the skills behind essay writing and developing our reasoned argument, which is going to be key to your A2 essays. And then the following two sessions then I'm going to be delivered by Ms Thomas, looking specifically at Unit 4. So Unit 3 last week and this week, Unit 4 then next Tuesday and the following Tuesday as well, all at the same time of 4:30 until 5:10. So today then, session 2, we're going to be looking at essay writing skills and developing reasoned arguments. And we're going to have the same structure as last time, where roughly about 30 minutes of me talking and then maybe 10 minutes or so at the end for questions and answers. Now, throughout the period, throughout this presentation, if you'd like to ask any questions, in the top right-hand corner, there is a little kind of speech bubble with a question mark inside. If you click on that, you'll be able to ask a question, and then it might be answered as we go along by Ms Thomas, or if it's something specific to Unit 3, then at the end, I'll take some time to answer it. And you can either ask your questions as we go through, or ask them at the end, if you prefer, completely your choice. Now, as I said last week, A2, Unit 3, is made up of 10 key topics, 10 breadth studies. Okay, that's Wales, resistant conquest and rebellion, poverty, protest and rebellion in Wales and England, Reformation and discovery in Europe between 1492 and 1610, royalty, revolution and restoration in Wales and England from 1603 to 1715, France, the Ancien regime through to Napoleon, parliamentary reform and protest in Wales and England, social change and reform in Wales and England, the American century, changing leadership and society in Germany, and changing leadership and society in Russia as well. Now, as I said last week, again, my kind of topic, my speciality is the American century. That's what I teach here in St Joyce High School with our sixth formers, and so that is that's where my knowledge lies. But the skills we're going to look at today are going to be relevant to all of these topics. In every single one of these topics within Unit 3, you write an essay and it's marked according to the same mark scheme, which we'll look at in a bit more detail in a minute. So even if I'm using an example from maybe option 2 or option 8, which I teach, it is still going to be relevant and applicable to your option that you're doing in your school or sixth form, wherever you are in Wales. So don't go thinking that because I'm focusing on a different example, it's not relevant to you. The skills behind it, the thought process behind it will be relevant and will be key to helping you in this process as we go now into kind of collecting evidence ready for the grading of yourselves at the end of Year 13. So we are thinking this lesson or this session about skills, about how we're going to improve our essay writing. And ultimately, points mean prizes, marks equal grades. So where do marks come from? Well, in A-level history essays in Unit 3, they come from what we call the band characteristics. And at this point, usually I find in my experience that A2 students are usually either in band 3 or band 4. Band 3 being about 11 to 15 marks out of 30. So you're talking D grade through to C grade, or band 4, 16 to 20 marks, where you're talking C up to A grade. That's in my experience where at this point in the year, most of our students are. And it's about then just bringing together all those little bits of knowledge that you're learning through those different essays together to find out how then to access those top grades or to move you from one band to the next. So band 3, what does band 3 look like? What does it mean? Well, this is the jargon of the exam board, right? It starts by saying it's a two-sided argument, it's two-sided, there's listing and there are assertions. Well, that means that you demonstrate more than one perspective, more than one point of view, but you state them rather than discussing them. It's almost like a list rather than a debate and a discussion. And then they go on to say the response has some patchy period coverage, which means that you're missing big sections of time from the period in that question. There is some accurate and relevant knowledge of the main issues associated with the relevant theme. So you've made your knowledge specific to the theme in the question. In order to be in band 3, you need specific knowledge, and without that specific knowledge, you won't be in band 3 yet. And you have written probably a for and against argument. And that does allow you to reach some sort of conclusion, but it's a for and against argument. It's not looking at it in any more depth than a for and against argument. Whilst band 4, the characteristics of band 4 are a meaningful discussion, mini judgments, meaning that a discussion does see more than one point of view, but you don't draw all of your judgments together into one judgment, one big judgment, or more than one big judgment sometimes. The response attempts to cover most of the set period and discusses the key concept in the question. So you are covering most of the set period, most of those years listed in the question, you're covering it, but still not all of those years. And you do discuss more than just a feature in the question, but maybe not everything relevant to the key concept in the question. And we'll look in a minute, what do I mean between the feature or the factor in the question and the key concept. It demonstrates some accurate and relevant knowledge of the key features and characteristics associated with the theme. That means you'll discuss, often by stating different points of view, of the impact of events on the key concept in the question, but there may well be some drift. Right? As teachers and examiners, we might see and we might write some drift on a paper. That means that it is not sticking completely to the key concept in the set question. And it provides a supported judgment. You've begun to use relevant information to make a big judgment. Sorry, apologies, to make mini judgments, not a big judgment. That's a characteristic above band 4. So that's where students often are at this time. But obviously, in order to be getting higher grades, and as ever, we're striving to better ourselves, band 5 and band 6 are those top marks. So what we're going to focus on then for the rest of this session is trying to help you conceptualize and visualize what these different elements of the band 6 characteristics will be like. So band 6 says the response is specifically focused on covering the whole or nearly all of the set period. So I'll help you think about how you can cover the whole of the set period. The debating the key concept in the question. Again, I'll help you think through how you can debate that key concept in the question. Provides a substantiated, sustained and integrated judgment. And it demonstrates accurate, relevant and precise knowledge of the key features and characteristics associated with the theme. Precise knowledge, accurate and really relevant to what you are discussing. So how do you ensure your answer is fully focused on the key concept? Well, that brings us back to what we looked at last lesson, about spotting those historical concepts and using them to frame our understanding of the content, but also we're going to need to apply that to the exam or to any essay questions as well. So as you can see, all questions for Unit 3 expect you to engage in debating the key concept in the question. We'll look and we'll find out what the key concept is and how to spot that in a bit, but we need to know from the beginning that focusing on that key concept is crucial. To do this then, or to do this effectively then, you need to become skilled at spotting the concept and the evaluation that the question requires. Not the concept or the evaluation that you want the question to be, but what the question requires. And this is vitally important then to ensure you answer the question set. The thing that usually lets students down is not answering that question set. Some students don't learn quick enough from AS level mistakes, and that's why they maybe remain in bands 3 and bands 4 rather than moving up those bands. Now, at the end of the day, if we compare the mark scheme, the band characteristics for AS to A2, then the only difference is, according to the A2 mark scheme, that your judgment is integrated. Everything else is the same. They're asking you to cover the whole set period, to engage in a debate on the key concept. So in an exam, right, or in any evidence gathering, because teachers, staff in your school and college will use probably past papers in order to gather this evidence, this is what you would have been faced with. Okay, an exam framed like this, where you answer either questions 1 or 2 from section A, and then answer the compulsory question in section B. So section A questions, this is an example from the breadth study 9, Trading, Leadership and Society in Germany. The choice of questions in section A could be, to what extent was the Kaiserreich the most significant political development in Germany during the period 1871 to 1919? Now note that that's a fairly small time period, isn't it? It's not even covering a third of the time period of that whole module. To what extent then, the second question, to what extent was Willy Brandt the most effective German leader in the period 1945 to 1989? Again, a shorter time period than the whole of the period that you'd be covering. And all relevant, or both relevant, to one of the 2 themes that you would have studied as part of the wider unit. Section B then, question 3. The most significant economic changes in Germany in the period from 1871 to 1918 were introduced during the Nazi regime, 1933 to 1945, discuss. And the big difference here is that section B, that question 3, is covering the whole of the time period, 1871 to 1989. Just as a note, here, in terms of the changes the exam board made to the paper before the scrapping of exams, they said actually that there'd be a choice of questions in section B, and so hopefully in that evidence gathering from your teachers and staff in school or college, there will be a reference to more than one question in section B which you could choose from. So section A is a short time frame and can be as little as just 15 years of your minimum 100-year time period. Section B covers the whole time frame of the study, and so it often focuses on a comparison of one of the key concepts: similarity and difference, change, continuity, significant individuals, cause and consequence, all those key concepts we looked in detail at last week. So the very first thing you need to do when you are faced with an essay question is you need to identify the factor in the question and the key concept in the question. The factor being the specific thing that's mentioned in the question that they want you to talk about in relation to everything else, and the key concept then the debate. How are you going to debate it? So for option 1, right, we could say that the factor is social change. That's one of many things you need to talk about, but you definitely need to talk about social change. The key concept then is the most significant development. So to what extent was social change the most significant development in Wales in the period 1240 to 1284? So in order to engage in a debate, you must be referring to the most significant development. What was the most significant development? Was it social change or was it something else? Option 2 then, how far do you agree that municipal schemes were the most effective method of dealing with the problem of poverty and vagrancy in the period from 1558 to 1603? Just take 30 seconds, see if you can identify the factor and the key concept. We could say the factor is municipal schemes. It's one of the few things you need to talk about. The key concept is, was it the most effective method of dealing with the problems of poverty and vagrancy? Note the time period again, because that's for specific. I'd underline that time period if I were you, so you know and you can remember what years you need to be discussing between. Option 3 then, how far was John Calvin the most significant influence on the spread of Protestantism between 1521 and 1559? 10 seconds, which is the concept, which is the factor? Hopefully you got that John Calvin would be the factor, right? He's one of many influences you need to discuss, but the key concept is to what extent was he then the most significant influence? You would need throughout your essay to be debating, was he the most significant influence? Were other things more significant in influencing the spread of Protestantism? Option 4, I've just given it away, haven't I? Option 4, the Petition of Rights of 1628 was the most significant development in politics and government during the period from 1625 to 1660. Well, the Petition of Right of 1628 is the factor, and the debate is the most significant development. So it's one of many developments you would discuss, the Petition of Right. You discuss other developments as well, but you're debating, you're focusing on that key concept of was it the most significant development or not? And remember, you must cover all of that time period, hence why I would underline that time period as well. Now, section B, okay, so remember what I said about section B covered the whole of the time period of the theme that you were studying. Option 5, the greatest changes in French society and economy during the period from 1715 to 1815 were those that affected the Catholic Church. Discuss. 5 seconds. What is the factor in the question? What's the key concept? Have a think. So your factor being the Catholic Church, the key concept, the greatest changes. Option 6, the power of government was mainly responsible for the failure of most popular protest movements in the period from 1780 to 1885. Discuss. Factor would be the power of government. The key concept would be was mainly responsible. So the power of government is going to be one thing you'd discuss as a reason why popular protest movements failed. You discuss other things, but your debate throughout is whether or not it was the power of government or something else that was mainly responsible for that failure. Option 7, how far did the policies of the national government 1931 to 1940 make the most important contribution to the tackling of poverty and unemployment in the period 1890 to 1990? A factor being the policies of the national government, and the key concept, the most important contribution. So the policies of the national government are one of many things, one of many factors you will discuss as to whether or not they were an important contribution in tackling poverty and unemployment in order to debate and judge what was the most important contribution. Option 8 then, the main reason for improvements in the lives of African Americans in the period from 1890 to 1990 was the action of the federal governments. Discuss. Again, main reason for improvements is your key concept. Action of the federal government is your factor. Action of the federal government is one of many things that you would discuss that led to an improvement in the lives of African Americans. But ultimately, you're debating, you're deciding what was the main reason for those improvements. And note then for section B, the time period is the whole time you've been studying, so you must cover the whole of that time period. For that theme, you must cover the whole of that time period. Now, essay questions are always worded with similar question stems, right? There might be a quote and then discuss. It might be to what extent does something something. How far do you agree something something? How far was or how successful? Now, all of these question stems really require you to make an argument and then make a judgment between the factor in the question and other factors that are related to it as well. So it doesn't really matter what the question stem is, you're still expected to make an argument and then make a judgment as well. It doesn't really matter, you could almost take the question stem out and you'd still be doing exactly the same thing. Making an argument and then making a judgment. So how will the essays be worded? Well, they will always be on an issue that is stated on or closely linked to the specification. It won't be something that you've not really studied because it's not in the specification. It'll be phrased in a way to promote a lively debate. If they're looking for a debate, they need to phrase it to make you have a debate. The essay will cover a considerable period of time. Remember, it's a breadth study, so it will be a longer period of time than probably your Unit 4 questions. The essays will let you sustain an argument throughout the answer. The essay should let you show accurate understanding of the relevant historical concept in the question, going back to those concepts we looked at last lesson: change and continuity, cause and consequence, etc. And essay titles will include a key judgment word or words which will allow you to form a balanced judgment. So, for example, in this question here, the power of government was mainly responsible for the failure of the most popular protest movements in the period from 1780 to 1885. That key judgment word is mainly. Was it mainly responsible? There's no doubt that the power of government was one of many things that was responsible for the failure of most popular protest movements, but was it mainly responsible or something else? And those keywords across, I looked through all the exams for options across 2019 and 2018, and all the words, those kind of key judgment words, were mainly, more, how successful, how effective, how far, most important, most significant, most effective, or greatest. Right? They're all a word that's asking you to make a judgment. Is that more important than that? Was that the most important, or was it not? Was that the greatest achievement, or was it not? They're asking you to make a judgment. So how about trying to make your own question now in your head, right? And you can do this, right? And you can go back when you watch this again or see the slide, you can do this. Pick a question stem, one of those, a quote then discuss. To what extent, how far do you agree? How far was, how successful? Then pick a specific piece of content from your specification for a factor. Then you kind of chuck in a judgment word, mainly, more, how successful, how effective, etc. Then pick the specific concept, one of the ones we looked at last lesson, that kind of fits into it. And then pick a time frame within your topic, and then chuck 30 marks on top, and you've got a question, right? I don't teach this at all. I applied this by looking at the specification, and I think actually I'm quite proud of this. This is probably one question that the examiners might want to take off me and use for next year. To what extent did the White Rebellion pose the most significant threat to royal power, 1509 to 1558? They probably won't take it, but still the point stands. Use that. You can create your own essay questions, and that way you can practice writing more essays if you wanted. So far then, right, we've looked at focusing on the key concept in the question set. So how do you ensure then that you cover the whole time period and the main developments? Well, this, I would suggest, firmly comes in the planning stage of writing your essay. So this is a tool I suggest you use, right? Use a RAG rating, right? Red, amber, green, and rate the key features and characteristics in the question. So to start your planning process, what I do is I recommend you RAG rate the content that is related to the question you're answering by using 3 colours. Red, features that have little relevance to the inquiry. Amber, features that have some relevance to the inquiry. And green, features which are directly relevant to the inquiry, directly relevant to the key concept in the question. So if I use an example of one that I do with my year 13s, this essay question: to what extent did American governments pursue a consistent approach to foreign policy in the period from 1898 to 1941? I've started, haven't I, by highlighting my factor and my key concept, American governments being the factor, consistent approach to foreign policy being the factor. Sorry, the concept. So I break it down then to start with the different time periods that we can see between 1898 and 1941. We have our pre-World War I era of the Monroe Doctrine. We have the World War I era itself. We have isolationism after the First World War, and then we have, as we move towards the Second World War, developing internationalism. So firstly, I recommend that you break down the time period of the question into mini time periods you studied in order to ensure you cover the whole of the set period. So in your essay answer, you make sure you're covering one aspect from each of those mini time periods at least. And that way, then the examiners can say you have successfully covered the whole time period. Then I would add the different events that I've studied in that period into each time period. So we'll just take one, for example, if we're looking at post-World War I isolationism, the things that my year 13s would have studied with relation to this, and anyone else during the American century they'd have looked at Wilson's 14 points and the peace settlement. They'd have looked at factors that drive isolationism. They'd have looked at the power treaties and the American role in Germany, as well as the good neighbourly policy. So I'd be adding those specific events that I've looked at. And then I'd be making a decision as to which of these are most directly relevant to the key concept in the question, which are going to most likely allow me to create an argument and a judgment on whether or not it was a consistent foreign policy or not. So if I believe that there was a consistent foreign policy, consistent approach to foreign policy, then I'll be looking at specific events. If I think actually there wasn't a consistent approach to foreign policy, then I might be looking at different events. But plan it out by rank rating it, deciding which ones are definitely relevant, green, because they're the ones you're definitely going to write about. Ones you're definitely not going to write about, the red. And ones that if you've got time, you might include, which are your amber factors. So section A versus section B, right? This planning was for a section A question, right? It didn't cover the whole time period, it didn't cover the whole 100 years from 1890 to 1990. Section B questions then will require you to be a lot more careful about what content you use because you've got a 100-year period. So you need to be more specific. And so it is important that you focus on the key concept that you identify that factor as in managing your content. We did that last time, and I gave you a tool then to look and to confirm actually through the WJC what concept it goes into. It's those you then would want to focus on in your rank rating. If it was a cause and consequence question, it'd be cause and consequence factors you most want to focus on in answering that question. So most likely will be green in your planning. For example, right? A section B question, to what extent were protests and rebellions in the period from 1483 to 1603 motivated mainly by political grievances? Well, the focus here is clearly causes. So don't drift, for example, into referring to significant individuals. Focus on causes and take that into account when you do your RAG rating in your planning. Most significant economic changes in Germany in the period from 1871 to 1989 were introduced during the Nazi regime, 1933 to 1945. Discuss. Well, the focus here is change, so don't drift into talking about causes. Focus your RAG rating on the changes. And so there, hopefully you've seen how we can ensure that we specifically focus on the whole period that is in that set question. Next then, we're going to think about how do you ensure you debate the key concept in the question. Well, almost to some extent, writing your essay as if you're justifying your RAG rating is a way that you can help to write it. And to do this then, you'll develop a difference between assertion and argument. Assertion being a statement of opinion. You're not supporting it with any fact or any detail or any reasons, it's just a statement of opinion. Whilst an argument is an assertion that's then justified with reason, with detail, with explanation, with analysis. So in order to move from assertion to argument, then we can look at this example question below and see how you could turn it into an argument. So the essay question could be, how far do you agree that the work of President Johnson had the most significant influence upon the achievement of civil rights for African Americans in the period 1941 to 1968? Now, a sub-idea could be enter into a debate as to the role of Martin Luther King, and I could be starting off with the fact that Martin Luther King had a huge influence on civil rights. So my assertion could be that African Americans were subject to a large amount of discriminatory attitudes at this time, which Martin Luther King mobilized the civil rights movement against. That's an assertion. That's me stating a point. In order to make it an argument, I need to provide support for this assertion. I need to reference it between Martin Luther King, the concept in my little sub-idea, and the factor in my little sub-idea, and the factor in the question, which is the work of President Johnson. My second assertion within that paragraph could be that these attitudes were stubborn, long-lasting, and worse in areas, particularly the South, that didn't vote for Johnson. That's an assertion, that's a statement. I'm not backing that up with specific information, with reason. So again, I need to provide support for this assertion, referencing Martin Luther King, my factor within this sub-idea, this paragraph, and Johnson, the factor in the question itself. Finally, then, another assertion might be Martin Luther King may have helped push Johnson into action to rectify the issues. Again, I need to back that up with an argument, with detail, with reason, with explanation, with analysis. So you, as an essay writer, need to ensure you're moving from assertion to argument. You need to move from saying this happened to explaining why this happened, to giving reason behind it, to giving detail behind it as well. For a debate to occur then, right, build on it, you need to analyse. And analysing is looking at something from more than one perspective or point of view. And a key way to do that is to say on the one hand, however, on the other hand. And that forces you to do it. And key things that can help you analyse are looking at it over a period of time, right? Long-term and short-term. On the one hand, the long-term impact was this. However, on the other hand, it was undermined by the short-term impact, which was this. Perspective. You could look at it from a political, economic, social, or individual effect, or a combination of all of these. By looking at it from different perspectives, you can then begin to analyse. On the one hand, politically it did this. On the other hand, economically it did this. And extent as well, small or large, how big that impact was. So to develop it onto an argument, you need to include specific evidence, analysis, and the points that you're looking at in order to try and develop a convincing debate. Using on the one hand, however, on the other hand, is a good way of doing that, or creating that debate. And a planning tool to help you do this, to help you organise this, could be this, right? You'll have this, it'll be on the website, okay? Essentially breaking down the period coverage, key features you need to make sure you mention, but making sure that you're splitting it into evidence that supports the proposition in the question, that Johnson was the most significant influence on achievement of civil rights, but then evidence to enter into a debate. Why maybe Johnson wasn't the most significant? What other significant influences were there on the achievement of civil rights? So we've looked at then how we're going to debate the key concept. And we're going to move on then, thinking about sustained and integrated judgment throughout. So how do you reach a sustained, substantiated and integrated judgment? Well, this all starts from your introduction. And I firmly recommend to my year 13s, they write an answer in a nutshell as their introduction. Overall, essentially, what will their argument be? Because unless you know what your argument will be at the beginning, then how are you going to integrate it throughout? Overall, right, or at the end of the day, it's not a whodunit novel, right? It's not a crime whodunit novel where we don't want to know who did it until the end. We want to know right from the beginning. We want that plot spoiler right at the beginning, right? We want to know from the start what your argument is going to be. If you don't know what your argument is going to be from the start, then how will you be able to integrate it throughout? And as part of that, you can briefly define the key terms, and crucially, don't waste time by writing a really long introduction. Right? Briefly define the key terms and your overall argument. My example for the question that we've just looked at could be this, right? What a good one looks like. President Johnson, no doubt, had a significant influence on the achievement of civil rights. The passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and subsequent Voting Rights Bill of 1965 saw a significant de jure improvement in the lives of African Americans 1941 to 1968. However, many civil rights campaigners during this time were actively working towards ending de facto achievement of desegregation. The right to vote, freedom from discrimination, evidenced no better than in the Selma campaign, which occurred after the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Civil rights could only be said to have been achieved when this happened de facto, an attitude had changed, and therefore the role of President Kennedy in changing attitudes and Martin Luther King for promoting de facto civil rights makes them a more significant influence. So overall, my argument would be that de facto segregation and attitude changes have more impact than simple de jure law-based changes, which I suggest President Johnson was able to achieve. He achieved law-based changes for those two key acts, but he didn't necessarily be able to change the attitudes or the de facto segregation that in reality changes the segregation. There's also a key difference between mini judgments and a big judgment. Okay, now here's an example of a mini judgment. President Johnson was only able to pass the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 because of the goodwill generated by the shock of Kennedy's assassination, so he's less significant than Kennedy. It's a mini judgment because I'm making that judgment in isolation, really, and because I am just simply saying he is less significant. A big judgment is slightly different. An example of this could be this. President Johnson capitalized on the legacy of Kennedy and the short-term shock brought by his assassination to ensure long-term significant advances in civil rights. Nevertheless, these long-term changes in law were unable to challenge the attitudes of many white Americans and African Americans who saw Kennedy's assassination as unconnected to the civil rights issue, and so he continued to look elsewhere than the presidency for their influence and inspiration on civil rights. So I'm trying to make it more comparative. I'm trying to integrate different viewpoints. I'm trying to integrate a difference between long-term and short-term, and that turns it into a big judgment rather than a mini judgment. That comparison between Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, it becomes a big judgment. So top tips then to ensure that judgment occurs throughout the essay is to plan well. What evidence can you use to back up and challenge your argument to ensure that it is a debate? Use the words of the question throughout. Make sure you frame your essay around the key concepts that we saw in the last session, as this will help to ensure that you use precise knowledge too. And don't view each paragraph/idea in your essay in isolation. And this is where, like I emphasized last session, identifying those key concepts is central because it helps you to contextualize. And it helps you to spot patterns and similarities, and so these will help to drive your debate and your judgment. By looking at it in context, you get to see these similarities, these patterns, which you can use to debate as well. And in your conclusion, don't view it simply as a summary at the end of your essay of what you said, and so dedicate little time to it. Equally, right, don't integrate new ideas here either. It needs to be slightly different. It needs to be somewhere where you tie any mini judgments together. Tie any mini judgments you've made throughout the essay already together and link them to your big judgment. Crucial to make it a big judgment. You saw that in the band characteristics at the beginning. Band 4, mini judgments. Band 5 and 6, big judgments. Examiners want big judgments where you are comparing and linking between evidence, backing the proposition in the question, and evidence used to debate that proposition, that idea in the question. So there we are, sustained and integrated judgment. Now, how to include precise knowledge? Well, ensure you're familiar with the content, and on top of it, as per last week's session, work on what we saw last week. If you missed it, if you missed last week, then please feel free to respond to the email that you get containing the PowerPoint for today and ask for the link to the YouTube recording of it, or go through the website and find the link as well, right? By Googling, as I said, the name in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. So that brings us to an end of our whistle-stop tour of how to write a good essay, how to tap into those different band 6 characteristics. So in the last couple of minutes, any questions, please feel free to answer. I'll have a look now and see if there are any questions. If there are any questions at all, please feel free to ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them as best I can. So one question asking if you can get the resources from the session and last session. Absolutely. As I said, if you Google the name, I'm not going to even try and say it. My Welsh isn't that brilliant. If you Google the name of the session in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, then the website for this should come up, and on there then you've got the PowerPoint and you've also got a recording of the session as well. So absolutely, you can have that. You can then do it at your leisure, slow it down a bit, pause it where you need to, etc.